Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Use Marketing Technology to Drive Record Growth. I'm Mackenzie Garrity with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. Brandon Collins leads Scorpion's Regional Sales Division in Dallas, Texas. Brandon and his team connect with dental practices and management groups to bring them new customers and leads through various strategies in digital marketing. Brandon has over 20 years of sales and leadership experience, coupled with 15 years of digital marketing experience. Brandon has accumulated more than 10 years of global sales leadership and digital marketing across Central America, Canada, and Brazil. Tony McGinnis leads our marketing division as Executive Vice President of Internal Marketing in Los Angeles. Tony and his medical marketing teams oversee the day-to-day operations of our campaigns and work to achieve successful results in all areas of our clients' businesses. Prior to joining Scorpion, he spent several years in the entertainment industry working on marketing campaigns for feature films and VIP Hollywood clients. Tony works to protect the efficacy of our client relationships by continuously training his teams on delivering a premium client experience. Dalen Farkas brings nearly 2 decades of experience in digital sales and marketing to his current role as the Vice President of Advertising Research at Scorpion in Los Angeles. In this position, Dalen helps direct the products that drive Scorpion's advertising platforms, products that address the ever-changing competition and challenges in the current world of digital advertising. Driven by a love of data, Dalen believes that the challenges presented to local businesses nationwide can be solved with cutting-edge technology and being strategic in the ways and places that you advertise. This belief has launched him towards his personal goal of creating a system that makes meaningful decisions that improve advertising returns and demystify the world of online advertising. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Brandon to begin today's presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I appreciate the introduction as well. Let me first start off today's message by telling you a little bit about Scorpion and who we are. Scorpion is a digital marketing agency. We're simply headquartered in beautiful Santa Clarita, California, just roughly 30 miles north of the city of Los Angeles. We were founded in 2001, and we've helped thousands of our clients grow and take advantage of the digital opportunities that are occurring today in the healthcare, legal, franchise, as well as the home services space. One of Scorpion's important traits, though, is what we believe is how we're structured in the company. So we're structured with internal divisions, if you would. Each division specializes in an industry, such as dental. So, and the dental division is comprised of folks that specialize and focus only within the digital space. And with this, coupled with our technology, which we'll hear about today, we believe gives us a uniquely unfair competitive advantage in the industry. So that said, all of that coupled together, we believe drives us and has allowed us to receive many awards across the industry. And as you can see, Scorpion is a Google Premier Partner. We were also named by Inc. as one of the fastest growing companies for the 9th year in a row. We've also been awarded many awards from authorities in the industry, such as Google, Google's Customer Satisfaction Champion for North America, Google's Platform Innovator of the Year Award, and then again, the #1 franchise marketing company by Entrepreneur Magazine, which we're all very, very proud of. So now that I've got that out of the way, let's talk about what we're going to discuss today in the topic. So we're going to first touch on the changes in the dental industry, which I'm going to touch on today. We're going to talk about how these changes affect you, how technology can help you by leveraging real-time data, improving the visibility and control, better identify the trends that are occurring today, and then get more out of the marketing spend that is happening within the practice. We're going to have some final takeaways and, of course, a Q&A at the end to touch on all of these topics and to take your questions. That said, so what changes are taking place in the industry today? So number one, technology has absolutely changed the game. It's the way that we consume information as well as the way that we educate ourselves. Those are two ways that technology has changed. So as we look at the dental industry, we look at from the flood of the high-tech production equipment that you guys have to communication media and collaboration technologies, all coming into market to offer the labs and the dentists new tools for delivering precision patient care. So no doubt technology needs are increasing. However, skilled labor to maintain these systems is lacking. Steve McGowan, who owns Arcus Laboratory, he said an uneducated workforce is not sustainable for the future needs of dentistry. So the current and the future state of dentistry requires a new kind of dental tech, one with a more broad skill set and certainly one that's more attuned to today's digital environment. It's been said that technology is changing so quickly, it's hard to keep your sights on the moving target, and I hear this every single day. The dental landscape will look dramatically different a decade from now than it does look today. Certainly more complex, so a lot of more uncertainties that exist today, and so this is ever evolving, and so we're seeing it change from day to day. And just as technology is needed to optimize the practice itself, it's especially so as it relates to acquiring new patients and your overall marketing strategies, which is what we're going to touch on today. So along with this technology issues, increasing competition is certainly rearing its head. And unfortunately, many practices that we speak to every day, they just simply aren't being proactive enough. And as a result, they unnecessarily continue to suffer production declines, lower patient acquisition rates, lower revenue per patient. And so to grow in this environment, dental practices, they really need to market wisely. They need to aggressively seek patient retention, and they need to do that by providing a superior customer service. Offering superior customer service is no doubt the best way to create a competitive advantage in the marketplace. It allows you to stand out from your competition in the market. And once you've established the benchmark for your customer service, you really need to focus on reaching and influencing a target audience. So who are those people in your marketplace who are searching today for services similar to what you offer? And in order to reach and influence that audience, you need a very strong online presence. So one that takes advantage of the recent trends that we see today, even in social media, and in best practices in dental marketing, such as paid advertising and organic practices. So in a lot of these trends that we're seeing are actually being driven by the leaders in the changing landscape and some of the unique business models that we're seeing rear its head today. So from membership club models that absolutely can assist the practice in keeping their patients regardless of if they've lost their insurance or have any coverage, to DSOs that offer dental coverage today by bypassing the insurance companies altogether. And even the increase in the corporate practice model, which is no doubt made it attractive for the new dentists coming out of school today, especially considering what we see in the rising cost of the student debt that they're incurring. So that said, and adding itself to this landscape are those companies that are looking to capitalize on the measure of high consumerism. The issues of healthcare affordability and accessibility are two of the biggest and most prevailing concerns that we see today. With Walmart's recent introduction of their first ever health center, which actually includes a comprehensive dental clinic, the dental industry is requiring a strategic thinking about how do you position your organization for growth? How do you position your market within your market? How do you how do you position your dental practice? So when it comes to marketing, that means that you've got to differentiate your brand from your competition, make sure you stand out. You've got to know what tactics are working and what isn't working. You've also got to get the most out of your marketing spend. Know how much you're spending and how much you're getting back. Where is that going out and what's coming in? So it's becoming increasingly important to capture the attention of your patients, but getting them in the right place at the right time that they're looking and with the right message to capture their attention. So that said, Tony's here. He's going to introduce how these changes are affecting your dental practice today. Tony, you're there?
I'm here. I appreciate it. The industry is definitely changing, and technology has changed the game as well, especially in the way that we consume information and educate ourselves. Today, we're going to discuss some challenges that exist in the marketplace, specifically those around patient acquisition. In this image here, I think it looks familiar to a lot of us. I know that I hate to admit it, but my family and I also and often assume this exact same position, even though we try not to. We have mom here on the left consuming digital media of some sort, maybe on social. We've got dad on the right, no doubt being messaged to for some type of good or service. And we've got the kids in the middle learning from the best, right? So think about how we all spend our time online and where our focus is. Our patients and our potential patients are really no different. So we should ask ourselves if we're intelligently and intentionally in front of them with the right message, in the right place, and at the right time. And to that end, although we hear right message, right place, right time so often, it's important to understand how deep that actually goes, these days especially. Google originally coined the phrase right message, right time, right place many years ago when Google was really the only right place. But times have changed, and there's so many places that it's really difficult to understand those right places and when. So in this diagram here, I want to touch on some of the touch points that occur outside of the practice and inside of the practice. I think we all, as businesses, spend a lot of time thinking about our office environment, our in-chair experience, the staff training, just to name a few. But what does that experience look and feel like before a potential patient ever walks into your office or calls you? So, and why does any of this actually even matter? Number one, attention is at a premium. There's so many digital channels available today. And patients want convenience and affordability, and they want the experience to be simple. But the patient journey is very complex nowadays. There's a lot of noise in the digital marketplace, and patients are really fighting to cut through it. And as a result, the digital experience is the first step in patient acquisition. So if we reference that previous diagram with the inside of the office and the outside of the office experiences, we can absolutely count on the outside of the office experiences being the first set of touch points that our patients have with us. And this is true for referrals, and it's true for patients that don't know who you are yet. So a good part of my day-to-day is speaking with practices that are looking to improve their workflow and attract more patients and ultimately attribute marketing dollars to revenue. And I frequently hear things like, hey, I struggle to identify trends across my marketing efforts over time. Or I hear that they're simply focused on current activity to try to plan for the future. And as a result, they don't know, or maybe don't even bother to know, which advertising channels are producing leads, appointments, and patients. And they struggle with a manual process of trying to attribute advertising channels to dollars spent, and they rely too heavily on what patients tell them about how they were found. And as we know, that's not scientific or very accurate. So multi-locational practices lose most, if not all, visibility, because then that becomes even more cumbersome to track. But what if we could more accurately attribute advertising dollars to actual goals achieved, and we could measure new patients by location, and we could track the return on marketing dollars invested? What if we could adjust strategies to achieve future revenue goals? So what we're going to talk about here is how technology can help us optimize time and investments and help grow at the rates that we intend to. So there's a lot of ways to spend and ultimately waste advertising dollars, finding the right strategy, but then the market shifts, and even after we find it, everything changes, and then now all of a sudden our strategy doesn't work anymore. Technology, though, namely a machine learning solution, can stay ahead of these shifts and make smart decisions in real time. So taking advantage of technology gives us power to better understand the scope of what is actually happening out there without having to guess. And we can really get our finger on the pulse of our key metrics and performance indicators are, whatever those might be for your business. And instead of just listing out these areas that we want to improve upon by using technology, I'd like to introduce Dalen Farkas, who is our VP of Advertising Research here at Scorpion, and discuss some really interesting and revolutionizing concepts on how machine learning technology can drive patient acquisition and create efficiencies in our advertising strategies.
Hey, Tony, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. Dalen, in this image here, what we're seeing is just a handful of some of the different online channels that are available today. And I think a lot of businesses ask themselves how they can possibly understand what each of them are and how they work together and what role they might play in their goal achievement. Take me back to simpler times, Dalen, when the patient journey wasn't as complex as it is today with all of these channels.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we can look at it similar to probably how technology of dentistry has changed over the years. The channels have changed too. The areas that we can advertise in, and even this abbreviated list here is, honestly, there's a lot more being added every day, every month. And even today, it's probably about 10 times larger than this alone. If we went back maybe a handful of years and we talked about where were people getting new patients from, word of mouth was very popular, and it still remains to be popular without a doubt. People would build a website, there'd be some good content, it's much easier to rank, maybe they'd be running some Google ads. That's about it, right? That was the kind of the online landscape back then. Right. And obviously a lot's changed since then.
Yeah, like we were talking about earlier, you know, back in the old days, it didn't really take much to be in front of the right person at the right time in the right place, because Google was really the only right place.
That's right. And everyone went there.
Exactly. So, you know, we think about that family in an earlier slide here where, you know, they were sitting on the couch and they were all on their phones. Take me through what a journey might look like or a buying cycle might look like today.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, something mentioned earlier that I really appreciated was talking about how it's almost like the expected experience and journey has changed from a buyer's perspective. They're looking for something different. And part of that comes from the fact that they're also inundated with messaging, right? We look at all these channels and all the ways that we can advertise. It's through social networks, display, websites, and take a look at that family on the couch. We have 4 very unique people sitting on that couch, and they're all doing something different. And today, there's a way to reach every single one of them. And that's a really good representation of how things are today. And the challenge becomes, okay, well, who is our ideal person that we want to put ourselves in front of, right? And then, hey, what channels are we going to use to leverage getting in front of them?
Right. And because there's so many channels, it's hard to be fluent and have expertise in all of them. So even if you are one of the lucky ones to be able to call themselves an expert in all of these channels, or somehow you have access to that expertise, give me some insight into how someone would actually harness them all together to achieve a goal.
Great question. And honestly, I don't even know if it's possible to, as a single individual, without leveraging technology, take advantage of all of them. There's only so many hours in the day. It just doesn't work. So even if you're fantastic at Google Ads, you're still going to have to take that data. You're going to have to put it somewhere. You'll have to crunch the numbers and then come up with an answer and then feed it all back, right, with some sort of a solution. Mm-hmm. Now, that is possible. A person could do that, but it becomes too time-consuming. It's too cumbersome. Now, extrapolate that kind of work out across all these different channels, and there's simply not enough hours in the day to do that. And that's why, even you see it with Google today, they're starting to introduce algorithms that help optimize a campaign automatically, right? This is the direction that everyone's going because of how big this industry is now.
Yeah, and Dalen, that really leads us to our next point here. Imagine if there was an algorithm that was evaluating all of this data, whatever that might be, the device, the appointment that was set, the ad copy, the day of the week, the time of the day, the search term that was used, maybe the geographical area that someone might be in. How can technology or an algorithm or machine learning make these real-time decisions on how we spend and where we spend our advertising dollars?
Yeah. So going back to the earlier statement you made, right message, right place, right time. It's been around for a long time, but that's really evolved, just like the number of channels and the ways that we can control these channels has evolved. If we look at this little wheel here, we see some things that sort of stand out. And if we just thought through it logically, that man on the right part of the couch, doing something on his phone. So let's say he's working a 9-to-5 job. There's probably a more ideal time to reach him if you wanted to reach him, right?
Right.
But every single one of these channels has evolved to offer us information that starts to expose how do we get in front of the right person. So it's no longer just the right message, right place, right time. We also start to look at, well, who is the person we want to be in front of? And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but honestly, it really comes down to evaluating each of these and understanding how each of them impacts your advertising and how you can leverage each.
So help me better understand. We have this technology that's capturing all of this information, and this is just a sampling that we're seeing up here on the screen right now. And it's taking all of this data, and not just from one channel, but from multiple channels that we're running advertising on, and it's making decisions and leveraging that data to do what?
Yeah, so we want to feed big data into a system that can look at things from a national trend, so we can understand predictively how something might run in any market. But at the same time, we need to be looking at it and saying, well, what unique elements might apply to specific markets? So take time of day again. There's a lot of different hours in the day that you could analyze.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll find, if you look at it closely enough, that some hours perform better or worse than others. Understanding that is what allows you to get more out of your advertising budget, and you need to do that across every channel that you're running advertising on.
Right, and understanding the marketing funnel, if you will, that there are different stages within a buying cycle, and you might want to message something a little bit differently based on where we're predicting that individual might be. Right, they may
Absolutely.
be, in more of a research mode, or we may be in a mode of where we're just trying to gain awareness, as opposed to someone who's a little bit further down that funnel that is, higher consideration, higher intent, ready to buy now. So this technology leverages data from multiple campaigns, is my understanding. But walk me through a little bit about how we then capture data from an individual campaign, from an individual market, and improve upon it.
Sure. So as we're collecting data, and so we apply something called predictive analytics, which basically says we want to analyze things across all of our clients. We want to come to some conclusions about when the best time of day would be to run, what's the best device, and how do we leverage each of those. But when we start running in a market, everything's going to change. It's going to be a little different, right? Potentially a practice caters to a specific demographic more than another.
Mm-hmm.
We want to think through that, and we want to react or respond to the pressures in how the actual advertising is performing, so we can adjust ourselves and make those little micro adjustments automatically through that learning.
Got it. Okay, that sounds really interesting and makes a ton of sense. And I think that, and we'll kind of dig deep into this here in a moment, but the focus here is to focus on valuable interest in leads, not just for the sake of making the phone ring, but for the sake of making the phone ring with the ideal patients that we're looking to attract. So we often hear that the number of leads or the cost per lead is really the primary metric that many practices look at. Is that the right way to look at it?
I think a lot of people would say yes. And while it's still valid to some degree, I think the thinking needs to evolve. If we take a step back and we say, look, we have all these controls now. We have all these different ways to look at it. And in the past, everything came through a couple different channels. You would lump it all together, and you really wouldn't have anything to know where that client's being generated other than what they might have told you. And then, as you mentioned earlier, that buying process is a little more complex, right? We're talking about a whole funnel. How can we get in front of people at the top of it, right? Not just capturing them when they're doing a high intent search.
Right.
So if we were to look at this and start to break down through a high level of attribution, knowing where people at that journey, what that journey really looked like, and we were able to then peel out, okay, who's becoming a client, we would start to understand that not every lead is created equal. Right? We obviously know that if you go into a dentist, you may be going for a cleaning, but you could be going for something else as well. Maybe just a teeth whitening. Maybe you want to sign up for braces or Invisalign. All these things obviously have different values and mean something different to the practice. So understanding how you're generating each one of those clients allows you to break down and understand, well, where is my marketing dollar generating the best return? And that's our focus. And I think it needs to be the focus of everyone out there as well.
Right. So for every lead we're getting into the practice, there was some sort of action taken by that person. And often times that might be a search that they did on Google, let's say, for instance. Those search terms, as we start to really develop the understanding of the metrics and all of the elements that make up a campaign, some of those search terms, for instance, may not be as valuable. They may all be turning into leads, but they're not resulting in patients, right, or the types of patients that we want. So I think it's fair to say that, you know, the old school way of thought of, you know, hey, if we can get X percentage of leads or X number of leads, then, you know, Y percentage of those are going to become a patient. That's kind of an obsolete way to look at things if that is our only kind of, you know, strategy there.
Absolutely. And that's why we really encourage people to look at things by giving us feedback from an ROI perspective. You have some sort of objective there, and maybe you're trying to hit a new record goal for yourself, and you need to be able to look at your advertising and understand what channels are working best. You used an example of a keyword, and I think that's a great one because it becomes very easy to look at. When someone looks for a dentist near me, that's much different than when they just search dentist. But understanding, okay, maybe they also interacted with channels before they did that search. And understanding what their impression is of you before they do the search and what their experience is once they reach the website, all of that comes together to allow you to understand what is effective about your marketing. Right? How much should you be leaning into one channel versus another? And Google's always releasing something new, LSAs, right? Great example. So you have these local search ads, or these Google guaranteed ads, and they pop up for some markets. And it's totally changed the landscape. And for some industries, it's fantastic. For others, it's not. But instead of blindly looking at it from a lead perspective, you need to look at it from how are we generating revenue, and are we actually moving forward towards the goals for our practice?
Gotcha. So what type of lead feedback would be required to make this machine learning solution run at optimal performance? So if I'm the dentist or the practice, what kind of feedback do I need to give you on the leads to really kind of close that loop?
And that's a great question, and it's actually one of the biggest things that make us different from Google's machine learning. Part of the challenge is that when someone is using Google's machine learning, they understand what might be turning into a lead. However, we don't really understand necessarily what's turning into a client by using their algorithm. So for us, we're actually looking at what's becoming a client. And in order for us to know that, there has to be some sort of a feedback loop from the client. We need to understand, hey, look, this bank of calls or this call was maybe a telemarketer, right? We should just ignore that. We should throw it out of our equation because it does go back to the general adage of, hey, garbage in is garbage out. So the more data and the better data we can feed the system, the smarter the decisions we can make.
Right. And Dalen, we're also starting to really see more multi-locational practices out there. And it adds such a level of complexity because you're not just trying to do all of this for one location in one market. You know, we've now just multiplied it by, in some cases, you know, tens, if not hundreds of different locations and markets. So how does technology play a role in really harnessing all of that data together?
So I love that question because honestly, what you find works in one market may not work in another. And that's just the fact of it. We see it all the time. So it's so important to realize that machine learning is so valuable because what becomes truth in one market, sometimes we'll see clients roll that out to every location, and then that's just the way they do it. And while it will work to one degree or another, it may not be what's best for that specific location.
Gotcha. So I really want to touch on the conversation of these campaigns and these marketing strategies kind of growing smarter over time. Is the data being collected on a wide scale, kind of also weighting the data that's being collected on that individual location or market and kind of then making decisions on what the right next step or decision might be?
Yeah, so think about it as kind of a two-stage process, if you would. If we start from a large set of data, national data that we collected from all dental practices running advertising, and we started to use some of that data to come up with a prediction on what we feel might be a good starting point. We have this massive database that we're leaning on, and then at that point, we collect more data locally regarding a specific market, and we understand the trends and differences. Right? Where might patients fall earlier into that purchasing funnel, if you will, and then how do they flow through that does change based off of the market. And our goal is to continually grab that information, analyze it, and localize it so it's the best fit for any individual location.
Gotcha. So as important as all of this technology is, how much human interaction should go into how we optimize and manage our campaigns?
Someone once told me a great example, which I'll tell here, and it's like an airplane. I think we're all pretty well aware that airplanes, for the most part, fly themselves. But I don't know about you, but for me, I know I'm much, much more comfortable knowing that there's a pilot on board too.
Right.
Take a self-driving car, for instance. You still have to program the direction, right? You still need to understand what the goal is and where you're trying to head. And that's still required today, even in your advertising, right? Every practice might have a different objective. They might have a different pain point that they want to solve, or something that just for them is strategically important. We need that human interaction so that way we can build strategy and direction for our campaigns. And once we're pointed in the right direction, all the heavy lifting, all the analysis, and all the implementation of those changes are best suited by a computer just because it's really the only way to do it. It just doesn't scale out.
Right. So a lot of this input is human, especially when we talk about the feedback that kind of closes the loop on all of the other stuff that are happening in the background and from an automated fashion. And as we all know, technology is only going to be as smart as the people who develop it and some of the human inputs that go into it. So I think that's a really key thing to remember. I think I'd like to talk about some final takeaways here, and then after that, open it up for some questions and answers. But I think that we need to understand that the digital environment has changed pretty drastically. Think about how we as individuals in our own time use digital mediums to get informed, educated, and ultimately make buying decisions. And again, that kind of goes back to that family on the couch. They could have been anywhere within that marketing funnel, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think one thing to think about as well is if you just looked at it from your own perspective, you realize that you have more options today than you did before. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking online or you're getting a message, you start to understand, if you looked at it just, again, 3 feet back, looking at it from above, that it's important to represent yourself well online, right? People have all these choices. You do have to stand out. You do have to do things a little differently. And it's interesting when you look at that previous slide where you talk about Walmart, right? I actually wasn't really aware that they were getting into that market. And while they carry a brand name with them, I think it's an interesting opportunity, right, for people to keep in mind that they're going to bring a very unique set of skills to how they start to market those practices.
Sure.
You're talking about a large business that they are experts at marketing online. Now, it's easier, I think, for you to stand out when you're taking a look at, hey, with this landscape changing, what do I need to do to change with it?
Right. So, and that brings us to the next point. So, not just accepting and understanding that things have changed, but also leveraging the incredible tools and technology that are available today. And ultimately deciding which of those are going to move the needle for your business. So it's not just about accepting something, it's actually kind of taking the action and then leveraging what's available. And finally, supporting your advertising decisions with actual data, and let's stop guessing and kind of wasting our time there and ultimately wasting dollars. Use evidence to make choices about how and where advertising dollars are being allocated, and enjoy the luxury of knowing what's producing and what isn't.
Absolutely. And I love that point. And honestly, we would love to work with everyone, but even if you're not going to work with us, we really ask that, hey, look, for your own sake, just ask your advertiser, right? Tell me what's working, right? Ask about some of those points that were on that wheel slide, right? Time of day. What are the best times? What are the best days for my advertising? Mm-hmm. And think about a partner that can bring it all together for you. One of the biggest challenges that we see in people making advertising decisions is that they'll have 3 different vendors, each handling a different aspect of their advertising. Now, none of those advertisers want to give up their budget if what they're doing isn't working. They're trying to protect it. So look at that from a higher level, look at it from the greater good, and understand that, they're in competition with one another. And it's probably going to be best for you to bring all of that together somehow so you can understand if one channel's not working, shift the budget to another. right?
Yeah.
And you need the data to make that decision.
You're right. And Dalen, you and I have both worked together for many years and have worked in this industry since, kind of the onset of it. And I remember the days, and I'm sure you do too, of looking at, Facebook and Google and, maybe a LinkedIn campaign all at the same time, or a display campaign or a marketing campaign, and trying to figure out manually what was working and what wasn't, and then trying to make the decisions on what the next step would be. It was a lot of guessing. It was a lot of manual work and late nights. And, I compare that to the world that we live in now, having this technology available. And, not only is it much easier and more effective, but it's producing because we're not guessing.
Exactly. And I believe that at Scorpion, we've always had the idea of results being the thing that matters. But what does that mean when we say results? For us, it's always about, well, what did it actually do for our client? It's great to put a number on a piece of paper or a report at the end of the month, but that's not really the truth of it. There's an actual result. There's an actual revenue tied to your dollars that you're spending in your advertising. And I've always liked that. I'm not going to call it guessing. I'll say experimentation. There was a lot of experimentation back in the day, but you start to understand what levers you can pull that really start to move the needle when it comes to the actual results from the client.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dalen. I think I'd like to open it up to some questions now, if we could.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon, Tony, and Dalen for that fantastic presentation. We'll now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your dashboard. We'll try to get through as many as we have time for, and it looks like we already have a few coming in. So one audience member wants to know, if we are using Google AdWords for our advertising, aren't those ads being optimized currently in the same way you are describing?
I think that's a fantastic question. So the difference between how we analyze and how Google would be analyzing that is that when we're looking at data, we're looking at it from what generated a client. But when you upload leads, or when Google's tracking conversions, really we're just talking about leads at that point. So we really don't close that loop to see, well, what's actually generating revenue. What you could do is you could say this lead on average, if I'm closing 10%, generates this revenue. But we're really kind of taking a step backwards from what we're talking about when it comes to actually tracking ROI.
Fantastic. Thanks for that clarification. Another audience member wants to know, how does Scorpion differentiate itself in terms of being able to help practices adjust to the new landscape and digital marketing needs?
I can take that. This is Tony. So Scorpion can definitely help a dental practice adjust to the new landscape because we have access to and expertise in the technology. I think we also take a much different approach in terms of really understanding what a client's goals are before we decide to work together and that it's a good fit. And we have a ton of experience in working with larger practices with multiple locations. We are a leader in the franchise world and in the healthcare and medical space with multiple locational type of businesses, but our ability to leverage technology to build out a strategy that accomplishes what our clients' goals are, I think is our biggest separator. And then our ability to communicate with our clients about what that strategy is, and not only the ability to then go and execute, but to constantly be transparent and reporting back what we're seeing, what we're changing, and why.
Fantastic. Thanks for that added description. Another audience member wanted to know, what feedback would we want from our individual practice locations to make the changes required to truly optimize our campaigns?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll take that. When we're looking at our leads and we're looking at what's generating patients, we really require someone to, like for us, log into a dashboard. There's a way to grade leads. You can even provide specific feedback on different leads. So that way we understand what's resulting in revenue or what's actually better aligned with the goal. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, hey, there's a person there that's helping to direct the strategy. And it's not only that person, but also an advertising person behind that as well that's looking at this saying, hey, is this aligned to what my client's trying to generate? Or what pitfalls or what things are we finding that we're falling into that we may need to adjust our strategy overall? So I would say, honestly, more feedback, the better. And I would say that we want to make sure that we're getting some sort of feedback on all of the calls that we're sending.
Yeah, and if I could jump on top of that too, Dalen, this is Tony. In our online dashboard that our clients all have access to, they have the ability to actually import or upload patient phone numbers and email addresses. And that allows our system to actually go back in and search to see how that lead actually occurred. And it will then weight, it'll match it up, and then it'll weight those behaviors or elements that existed to ultimately have that lead become a patient. And that's kind of the biggest, I think, or best bit of feedback that we can get to know that this lead actually became a patient, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve.
Fantastic. We have some great questions coming in. The next one is to all of you. For DSOs that represent several competitors in the market, what type of media is most scalable?
That's a great question, actually. I'll jump on that. So we do find, obviously, a very competitive landscape, but we also understand that what people are looking for when it comes to some of those DSO offices is that people want to stay very local, right? We analyze, well, who distance-wise is more likely to travel to which office, because there is a big preference in that. So when we look at media that can scale largely within small geographies, you'll see that we start to shy away from certain things like Google Ads. We may start leaning more into what can we do socially, what can we do from a creative perspective, follow it up with display, and focus more on some of those upper funnel type of activities. And we see that we start to actually change, and one of the ways we measure that is by looking at how many people are specifically searching for that practice. So we kind of combine a lot of different elements to come up with a plan, and we kind of feed the machine learning process to kind of forward that branding.
Fantastic. Thanks for that insight. The next question is, what successful tactics have you seen being used in reaching pediatric dentists?
I can take that. This is Tony. Pediatric campaigns have some unique elements to go with them, and very similar to what Dalen was just talking about, we have seen social be a very successful tactic or element in attracting new patients on the pediatric side. Social media has this incredible ability for us to really target the right types of patients. Now, in a pediatric campaign, obviously we're not necessarily targeting kids because they're not spending time on social, or hopefully they're not. But we know that their moms and dads are. And we understand what the demographic looks like of the ideal pediatric mom or dad. And we have this unique ability to run campaigns that are going to be in front of the right people. So I would say the most successful tactic we've seen in the pediatric space is definitely a robust social campaign that's also leveraging automation or machine learning to continue to make adjustments as those markets mature and change.
Thanks so much. Looking industry-wide, what percentage of the typical DSO's ad budget is spent on digital advertising versus traditional media advertising?
It's a good question. We're a digital ad agency, so I can't say that we always have the insight into what the budgets look like for offline mediums. But what we do know is that most people are going to be responsive to digital advertising. That's where people are spending their time. So I think a vast majority of an advertising budget should be digital versus offline.
And I think it's going to vary a little bit based off of how, what some of the objectives are. What's the total budget? How aggressive do you want to be? We find that traditional media and digital media really complement each other well, especially when you can think through the problem intelligently. One example is we've had clients that are sending out brochures, right? Just postcards, flyers, things like that, and that we can actually follow up in the same zip codes with digital ads that help support that. Because honestly, what happens when you get a postcard? Now, maybe you take it out of the mailbox, you look at it, you acknowledge it, but you throw it away. But now when you go online, 10 minutes later, you see the same thing. What sort of impression does that create for someone? Now, when they do a search, let's say later on they say dentist near me in Google, and let's say your ad is up there, they recognize the name. When they click on it, they're greeted with the same colors and image and messaging and branding that they've sort of grown aware to. That's powerful. And we've seen a lot of budgets, specifically ones, and it's been a challenge, but we've seen a lot of budgets with traditional media start shifting to digital because they just realize the response rate is better. I don't know if we're ever going to replace traditional media, but I think it's something that someone should explore. Maybe every market's going to be a little bit different, but it's definitely something to complement one another.
Yeah, and Dalen, it reminds me of, in working with clients all the time and reviewing their data and their feedback that they give us on the campaigns. We'll often be working with a customer who's running billboards, for instance, and we'll look at a lead and we see in the notes that, our customer left some feedback that said, this patient found us because they saw our billboard. But I look at that lead and I could see that they actually searched on Google for dentist near me, and they clicked an ad and they landed on a landing page and they called the phone number that was on the website. So it's a great example of how traditional media and digital media work together, and even different elements of digital media or different elements of traditional media, they all do work together. And sometimes you can't say that, this particular patient came to us because of this one thing, because they had exposure to, a TV commercial or a billboard or a magazine ad, but they also then saw, something on Facebook, and they became familiar and comfortable with your brand and your logo, and they found you that way too.
I think that's a great point. I'm really happy you brought that up because it's true. And a lot of people look at these two types of advertising as these competing forces, and it's not that at all, right? These things should and can work together. Mm-hmm. And also, too, look back at the technology. So you use the example of, hey, this customer mentioned a billboard. Maybe that was just the thing that stuck out, but they mentioned that because they were put on the spot when they came into the office and asked, how did you find us?
Right.
But we know for a fact that someone clicked on an ad. And that's technically how they found you, but obviously they were influenced by that billboard. Understanding that journey really starts to paint a picture of what's actually working for a practice, so that way we can actually use the truth and honesty behind it to build a better picture for them.
Agreed.
All great points. Thank you guys so much. Our next audience member wants to know if you have any advice for what's a great first step towards machine learning.
Is this a question on what would our first steps be, or what they were in the history? I'm a little confused on exactly what we're trying to answer here.
I think it would be, what if I'm a dental practice or a dental group, what first step might they want to take into leveraging machine learning to enhance their goals?
Perfect. So obviously if you look at social, I think social is a great one. Honestly, there's a lot of learning and a lot of automated algorithms that they include. Now, when we talk about machine learning, it's a little different than what we talk about, when we say like predictive analytics. Predictive analytics would be doing sort of an analysis of something, understanding something and drawing a conclusion from it, and then applying it somewhere. When you talk about machine learning, it's really the algorithms and the math problems that take place to solve an ongoing solution. So I would say if you looked at it more from, hey, how can I analyze and look at my current advertising and then draw some sort of a conclusion from it? What out of this is working, and maybe what's less efficient or what's not working? And I think if you start with that, that's really the first steps to understanding machine learning and what we're doing. And if I was to give a recommendation as far as maybe some of the things that you could be looking at, is look at the days that you're advertising and the performance from those days and the individual hours. Even if you were to say, well, how does business hours during the week differ from the weekends. And I would start looking at it from easy segments like that will start to give you a sense that there might be something to machine learning, right?
I would also recommend that someone, as a first step, might want to check with their marketing partner to see if they have this technology available and is it being employed on their campaign.
And that's actually a great point, and I'll kind of touch again on an earlier question regarding, isn't this something that's already available through some of these advertising platforms? And again, right, the idea of generating a call is much different than generating a patient, just like we were discussing earlier. Now, if you're looking at this and asking your partners what they're using, realize we do a lot of work to take away certain types of traffic. That could be someone looking for a free dentist or a discount dentist. And they're very likely to turn into a lead. And part of the trouble and some of the challenges when we're using some of these other algorithms is that they'll start to prefer those types of people because it appears that it's generating the lowest cost per call. And that's something to make sure you clarify when you are asking your current partner. It's just like, well, how are you attributing my actual jobs? How are you determining ROI for me? And then start backing it into some of these other questions about how is it actually working.
Agreed.
Building off of that, how long does it take for data to grow smarter over time?
Yeah, it's really not even a time point, really. It's just the amount of data that we're looking at. So if you wanted to evaluate the difference in performance between, say, devices, typically there's two devices, right? Mobile and desktop, and a very small amount of tablets. So when you're looking at a problem like that, you don't really need a lot of data to make a determination as to which one performs better, as long as you understand how one performs and the other one does. Now, when you start looking at hour of day or day of week, it may start to get a little more complex and may take a little bit longer. So there's no real exact answer, but just realize that, if it's a more complex problem, you need more data to solve it properly and accurately.
Yeah, and I'll say this is Tony, that when you're leveraging machine learning and you're kind of starting at a place where there is a massive amount of data from a national scale, you're not really starting at ground zero the way you would be if you were trying to do this manually. Now, of course, over time, as your specific market starts to kind of feed into the machine, it will get better and better at that point. But it's comforting to know that when you're working with a marketing partner that's employing this type of technology, you're not kind of starting from ground zero and kind of guinea pigging your marketing budget for the first few months to kind of figure it out.
Absolutely. And with any marketing agency that's out there, there may be their own approach of how they're starting or what their process is. It's also important to understand, well, what are they actually measuring? What are they optimizing towards? And get a good answer for that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for clarifying that. I want to open the floor up now to Brandon, Tony, and Dalen for any final thoughts.
I've provided a lot of thoughts. I don't know how much more everyone wants to hear. Brandon, do you have anything to add?
No, not outside of what I've discussed earlier in the presentation. I think that there's a lot behind some of the data points that I touched on, and there's certainly a lot of research and a lot of articles that I've tracked and read in order to bring me to some of those conclusions, and I'm happy to provide those articles. But outside of that, I think that you and Dalen have done a fantastic job and provided a lot of information that's useful for the audience.
Fantastic. And this is Dalen. I'll just say that I'd be very happy that if anyone does have any questions that come up or they're curious, I'd always be more than happy to answer anything that might come up later on down the road. If you ever wanted me to just take a look at something that you might be running currently, honestly, we're in the business of understanding, learning, and helping. So any way that I can help there, more than happy to do so.
Awesome.
That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Brandon Collins, Tony McGinnis, and Dalen Farkas for their excellent presentation, and Scorpion for sponsoring today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.